Who are you and how would you describe your position or role in the photographic industry?
So that's a good question because the photographic industry, as far as I see it, is very complicated. It's a whole series of industries, if you like. It's not just one industry, and I've been involved in taking photographs really since 1973. The first commercial job I did was in 1973. My name's Sid Shelton, and I've been seeing photography as a means of expressing my political views and my point of view for the last 50 years. And I'm now 74 and still working and still producing photographs. And hopefully I've not taken my best photograph yet. That's how I always think of the future. It's round the corner that the best picture I ever took. But the industry, as I say, is actually many industries. It's a changing scene all the time. My mother worked for a high street photographer as a in the office in the 1930s,
Wow.
and which is a whole genre of photography which has really disappeared in this country.
Mm.
And many photographers, many great photographers like James Barner, for example, started their life as high street photographers, in this case in Africa. But that part of the industry has gone. And there's parts like food photography, and there's architectural photography, there's fashion photography, advertising photography. It's many industries, and people slot in. My particular role in the industry of photography was really documentary photography, and I'd call it editorial photography because I'm a little bit of a loose cannon in terms of I don't quite fit into any of the sort of, no, I'm not a street photographer, I'm not a portrait photographer. I would call it editorial because I like to, sometimes I like to really compose pictures and to have a conversation with the person I'm photographing in a way which enables me to try and get close to the essence of the person, or to get them to give something of themselves to the image. There are many examples I could go through with you and say this wasn't working, so I did this, and eventually I went through 6 rolls of film before I got up. Other times I turned up and the first shot I shot, the person had not really, we're not on guard and had not started posing and starting to be wary of the camera. And the first shot I shot was actually the one that was the best picture I took all day. It changed, it varied, but I really got into the industry after I'd been to art school and studied painting in Yorkshire. I came down to London and I worked at St. Martin's for 3 years as a technician in the painting department. And I carried on painting, but it was very much, I was doing very abstract, hard edge, Frank Stella, Bridget Riley type paintings. And they really had no relation to the politics which I was espousing. And the two things were completely separate. I was doing this almost ivory tower painting, and yet I was going on demonstrations and I was arguing a particular socialist point of view. In 1972, I went to Australia, and I intended to go for a few months and ended up staying for 4 years. And it's then that I bought my first camera, which I actually still have, and that's also on the shelf over there, which was a Nikomat, which was the cheaper version of the Nikon F, and it was a fantastic camera, and the quality and the lenses were the same. The quality was superb, and I started taking photographs by getting involved with a movement around the Builders Labourers Federation, which was a trades union in Sydney, in New South Wales.
Legendary in the movement.
Legendary, yeah. And the Builders Labourers were led by this fantastic man who recently died, called Jack Mundy. And I photographed for them. And and I got also involved in a project which they were involved with, which was called The Block, which was a group of houses in a suburb called Redfern, which were occupied by Aboriginal people, urban Aboriginal people, and which they, with the help of the builders, labourers, and the then Labour government, which was run by Whitlam, they managed to acquire this set of 4 streets, which created a communal garden in the middle between, as a Aboriginal housing association, which was at the time it was really the first land settlement in Aboriginals in modern history. It sadly was woefully underfunded by subsequent governments, and was a target for the police of harassment and racism. But I did a photo story around this, and took lots of photographs. And together with a friend who was an academic and journalist, we sent this story with the photographs. I think I gave them maybe 30 pictures to a magazine, a weekly magazine called Nation Review, which was a sort of liberal version in a way of the Sunday Times colour supplement in Australia, but it was a standalone magazine, an A3 size magazine. And I thought, oh, no, they'll probably say, oh no, these are rubbish. But wearing heavily that working class background, I always thought people would think, oh no, they're not good enough.
Imposter.
Yeah, imposter syndrome. Exactly. And I thought, and this was in 1973, and we sent them off in the post, and then suddenly 2 days later a telegram arrived. This is the days of telegrams. Rather than Zoom, we're now talking on Zoom. It's come a long way of communications in those days. And it said, great story, great pictures, using this week.
Oh wow.
And that was my first published, and they used it on the front page and several double page spreads inside. And it was really a fantastic boost for my ego, but also for a vilification that I could actually get things published. And it was a way into that industry. And I became, from then on, I managed to get more and more freelance work. Yeah, but I also then worked for quite a long time, for I think nearly 2 years, as the staff photographer for the Communist Party newspaper, which was called Tribune. And that was a bizarre mixture of things, of going to like press conferences and photographing people talking at press conferences, to going to strikes and disputes, and it was fun, and I enjoyed working there. And I had this lovely little darkroom with a Leica Focomat enlarger, which I loved and would still love to get another one, because it was fantastic. You focused it once and then blew it up to whatever size. And I still have some of the prints I made in those days. In fact, in our kitchen downstairs is a print from that first photo story. In fact, the cover of that magazine, but the print that I sent them, as I sent the prints back, a 2016, which I printed on that Leica Focomat. Wow. But that was the way I got into the industry. But really, my life in photography has been, to some extent, a flirtation with the industry. I've always kept a little bit of arm's length from it, in the sense that I've never really done commercial photography, although I've done record sleeves and for EMI and CBS and all, and so on, and lots of book covers and magazine covers and things. But I've always kept a little bit of distance, and working with other people, especially in the period 1976 to 81, when I was totally immersed in the Rock Against Racism movement as one of the organizers, as well as graphic designers and a photographer. So I really, in that period in particular, I started to get more obsessed with graphics as well, because I was horrified at the way in which pictures were used on the page, as it were, and the way they were cropped, and the way in which the meaning could be taken out of a picture and changed completely by the way in which you used it on a page. And I wanted to control that, because I wanted to, something which I've always espoused was that I wanted to continue what I called the graphic argument.
Mhm.
And I think that, you know, the idea, of course, that a photographer is in some way a impartial observer of life is nonsense. You're not an impartial observer of life. You're very much a subjective um, observer, and make a very decisive selection about what you photograph and how you photograph it in order to express your point of view. And that's true of all photographers, and whether they know it or not. And I was very concerned that that the things could be photographs could be produced and then changed, and the
Yeah.
meaning could be changed completely. And so I got very much involved in graphic design and set up a company called what was one time it was called Hot Pink Heart Graphics, then Graphics International, and then now it's called, and it still exists, and it's called Graphics I Limited. Graphics I for international, but also for iMac or whatever, just information, or
Mhm.
can mean anything you want it to. But so really that's how I got into the industry and how I got into taking photographs. And I worked for 4 years in Australia for a variety of magazines, newspapers like The Age and Sydney Morning Herald, as well as Tribune, which I talked about a little while ago, and Nation Review, and a magazine called Digger. And I was young in those days, and so totally into music. So music was also a big part of my life,
Mhm.
and I did a lot of band shots and music pictures at that time. But does that answer the first question? Sort of.
That's a fabulous answer. You know, when I think of your career, I do always include in my head your graphic art skills and your graphic team, the way that you present the work. I know it's important to you.
Yeah.
Fantastic answer. So, like, moving to today, you know, if you were a young photographer beginning a career, how do you think you would get into the photographic industry? You know, what would be a good way to enter, a good strategy?
It's really hard, but I think it is incredibly hard, and especially now. But I think that you have to think um, visually, and that's the most important thing. Is that concern yourself with the visuals more than concern yourself with meeting the right people, or making the right contacts. Because if you produce the images, and you really can, then things will happen. And especially now, because communication's so much better. You know,
Mm.
I mean, you know about me partly because of the internet, um, like other people do, and we are in a great period of communication, but also we have to be aware that there is so much. Photography has changed so fundamentally, in the sense that everybody's a photographer. The technical problems that people of my generation encountered and had to learn and overcome, how to, you know, even get a correct exposure, how to get things in focus, how to choose your depth of field, what film to use, what processing to use, what paper to print on, all those sort of things. Those questions have gone. To produce a perfectly exposed, absolutely in focus photograph, you can do it on your phone.
Mm.
So it's now we have to move into the area where we're going to discuss the aesthetics, and that's what people have got to concentrate on if they want to be successful as photographers. Not the techniques. The technology is there, helps us and does that for us, but you have to make those choices, the visual choices, and it's tough to do that. But it's one of the things what interests me is the difference between, you know, Instagram's spaghetti of press button imagery is that everything's always absolutely in focus, and it's a maximum depth of field, because that's what your phone does for you. It produces in focus, perfectly exposed, and whereas real photography makes choices about that. You decide whether you're going to have, you know, am I now going to focus on your radiator to be out there, or your record collection, and turn you up, soften you. All those wonderful decisions which you always have been making as a photographer are still there to be made. They're still difficult, and you have to think very fast as well. It's a bit like, you know, you're a West Ham supporter, obviously, and it's a bit like being a footballer. Yeah, the best footballers are the ones that think really fast. And I think it's the same with photography. You have, especially documentary photography, where you're not totally in control of things. I mean, it's different if you're talking about a studio portrait where setting the lights up for an hour and a half and changing the backdrops till you've got it. But if you in a situation like a riot in Brixton, for example, you're making decisions, aesthetic decisions, very, very fast. You look at someone like Don McCullum and you look at his work and the situations that he was in Ireland or in Africa or Vietnam. He's producing the most incredibly composed and beautiful photographs, but in milliseconds, he's making those decisions, and he's calling on his experience all the time. He's calling on the ideas that he's developed constantly as you're making it. And I think that thinking on your feet is exactly like being a fit sports person. You've got to think fast, and you've got to train your head and your mind to actually be able to make those very fast decisions quickly. A good example is a photograph which is perhaps commercially the most successful photograph I've ever taken, is the one of Paul Simonon at the Clash at the Rock Against Racism A&L Carnival in 1978. I've sold that more than any other picture in my life, and it's but that I was on that stage for seconds because they were making that film Rude Boy, and they took control of the stage off us, and they were really the minders, not the Clash, but the minders were really aggressive, and you had to, in those situations, the adrenaline pumps through your head, and you've got to go, how am I going to make a picture here? And that's and I enjoy that. I love that sort of adrenaline rush and that excitement where you've got to work out how you're going to make a composition in milliseconds and make it work. And it doesn't always work. I mean, you do have plenty of failures as well. But I think that getting into the industry, it's worry most about what you produce and less about the mechanics of getting in. I mean, it used to be easier. I don't know whether you've ever read Don McCullum's autobiography, but it's a great read. It reads like a novel. It's really enjoyable to read. But in those days, he literally just walked into the Observer and said, I've done these pictures. Can you show it? And they went, over there, there's a picture editor, go and speak to him. And I can understand that, because that's how I got my job at St. Martin's. I walked into St. Martin's in Charing Cross Road and said, have you got any, I've just finished art school. I'm just down from Yorkshire and I'm looking for some work. Have you got any teaching work? And they said, no, but there's a technician's job going. Come for an interview. And you could walk, there was no security on doors. There was but those days are gone. Now we have to use other means, but it's produce the work first and foremost is the most important way of getting into anything, is if your work's good enough, you will hopefully eventually get recognition and work.
Fantastic answer. And talking about labour value, which I don't think we were, but as this is a career discussion, how do you get paid for your work? How do you get paid?
Well, it varies. I mean, nowadays I get paid in all sorts of different ways. Like exhibitions I get a fee for exhibitions usually. If it's like the Rock Against Racism exhibition, for example, has now been to Croatia, Finland, Oldham, Newcastle, I don't know, Glasgow, Bradford, all over the place. And each time I get a fee from that, because that's how Autograph, who are fantastic organization and great at looking after the artists or the photographers that they represent, always insist on negotiating a fee for the exhibition, which is brilliant. And they've it's working with them has been always a pleasure, because they look after you. But selling pictures nowadays, mostly I sell pictures from my archive rather than new work, and you just have to negotiate all the time different prices, and you can sell the same picture to some people. Sadly, the left are the worst often in paying. They'll say, can we have these 12 pictures? And I go, yeah, okay, I'll do them at a deal for you. What about 60 quid each? They go, oh no, we haven't got any budget. We were hoping we could just do it. It'll be good for your career. I went, I'm 74 years old. Thank you. Good for your portfolio.
That's such a classic line. It'd be good for
Yeah,
your career.
I know.
If you
And
had a
it's,
pound for every time you heard that, you probably wouldn't
I
need to work.
know you can't eat it though. It doesn't pay the rent, as it were. But mostly, I think nowadays, I don't know. Mostly people are prepared to negotiate a decent fee or some fee at least. I mean, I recognize that it depends on the customer's ability to pay. I did a series of brochures in late 80s, I think, for digital equipment, who are now part of Hewlett Packard, were bought out by Hewlett Packard, and it's about dealing rooms in Amsterdam, and there were photographs. I went all around doing photographs of dealing rooms and dealers, and I charged a ridiculous amount of money by comparison with what I'd charged for a left-wing book cover. But that was because it related to their ability to pay, and you have to assess that. And you can be too. It's always difficult because you can be too ambitious, and they can say, okay, sorry, no, too expensive, and walk away and find someone else. On the other hand, you can be rather stupid, and you later discover that someone else who was also doing pictures was charging 3 times as much as you were. So there's
dilemma.
Talking to the photographers is always good, though. It's always good to talk to people and say what, and especially if there's a exhibition of joint work. Someone like Homer Sykes often rings me up and says, how much are you charging for this if there's some exhibition on? And I'll say, oh, I'm charging 150 quid a print. And they go, oh, I've charged 175. So we better try and make sure we all charge the same. So it's tricky, and you can get it, and I have done many times, get it wrong and undercharge. And I've tried to overcharge sometimes and lost jobs.
So talking about, so do you need to supplement your income in a second job?
Well, in my case, I have, because I've always had the graphics design company. So, I've at the moment, I earn more money from photography than I do from graphic design. But in other periods, I've earned more money from graphic design than I have from photography. So it's two bob each way. And a lot of the work what I've done, an example is, for years, we did a lot of work for the Big Lottery Fund, which was the organization which hands out money from the lottery to good causes, that's how they put it. And it was a mixture of photography and graphics, and that's how I've tended to work mostly. Is that mixture that go, okay, well, this is what we want to do, but we'll do the photographs as well as do the design work. And I've managed to survive. I've not got rich because I've never worked in commercial photography. I've never worked in advertising, or that's where the big money is and the real, where people get very rich. I've always worked in social photography. That's how I'd describe it.
Fantastic. Okay, so photography has changed immensely over the last recent period, kind of thing, especially since the development of digital technology and social media and so on. So how do you sustain your position in this competitive photographic environment? And, how do you see the future of this environment? Because it kind of feels to me like we're at the beginning.
I think you're right. I think we are at the beginning. But I think it's I find it really exciting in many ways. And because it also, what's so exciting about it for me is that the contemporary photography and contemporary technology also links very much with the old technology. Like scanners. I have just on the right here an Imicon scanner, which scans the most incredible quality from 35mm negs, and I've printed masses of pictures which I've never printed before in a darkroom, and I love the way in which we can link the old technology with the. It's a bit like taking an old vinyl master and then remastering it in a digital studio. So the two are linked very much, and the aesthetic's not changed. What's changed only is the tools that we use. But what has changed is the prevalence of imagery. But most of that imagery, as I would describe as, and most of it on social media too, as visual information, not photography. And there's a big distinction. And I think the coming debate in the future will be about where does visual information end and where does real photography begin? And what I mean by real photography is where it's photography which has something more to say than merely informing you that this dog is peeing against that tree. And the sunlight's beautiful, and but is actually saying something else. And I think that that for me is really, oh, sorry, I wiped the screen, but I didn't froze you for a minute. But it's, no, it's, I think that's the exciting thing about the future is that it, but the other thing I do really like, and that is that if you look at the history of photography, and especially in the 20th century, you know, the development of the miniature camera and the Leica in particular, but other miniature cameras as well, to a degree democratized photography. It gave photography tools, photographic tools, to a huge number of people who didn't previously have them. They couldn't go around with huge great plate cameras and in carriages and with massive tripods. It democratized that. And I think that digital photography has done the same thing. It democratizes photography. It unleashes, and it is going to unleash a phenomenal number of, especially, you know, the next generation who are going to have these new tools, which they didn't have before, because they partly, and also they got cheaper. You know, you to get a really high quality photograph, you can get it from a phone if you're clever enough to use it. If you can take the right photograph, you don't have to. I mean, I've never been particularly obsessed with the tools of photography, and I know that there's quite a lot of photographers who, I'm sure, just get into photography because they love cameras and lights and all that kits that you can go out and buy. And they talk about, oh no, but the F3, which was produced between this date and that date, is actually is better than this one, and this film is actually, you know, I mean, I used to use most of my early black and white work is all on either Tri-X or HP5, and I've no idea which is HP5 and which is Tri-X, because to me they were the same. They were nice, and I'd process them. I always processed film in ID11, and I always rated it at 800 ASA, so I overdeveloped it to compensate for the underexposure, and which increased the grain size, but also increased the shadow detail and the contrast. And it was a simple technique, but it was a technique which suited me, and it didn't become cumbersome. I didn't become obsessed with technique. And I know a lot of photographers who have been totally obsessed with technique. And really, all the digital change really is it's a new technique, and it's a much more accessible one, and it's a more democratic one. It's you know, it really does give photography, but it also, you know, it's like all technologies. You know, it's like in graphic design, when graphic design moved from hot metal to litho printing and then to computer Apple Macs. It democratized graphic design because it gave these tools to a whole range of new people, but it sent graphic design forward, you know, with people like Neville Brody and that whole face period, but it also sent it backwards at the same time with people in the office who went, oh, I can do this poster for you on my PC. So it's the same with photography. It goes in both directions. It's the new technology has both enhanced and improved photography, but it's also degraded it at the same point. It works as a double-edged sword.
I love that about the democratization. You know, we've always looked forward to this world when everyone has access, you know, through, you know, financial barriers or skill barriers and all the rest of it. And it's like this fantasy world of like anyone can make anything. We're nearly there in that way, aren't we? It's, you know, a young person on a council estate can afford to make a decent film.
Yeah.
You know, it's just fantastic.
No, that is fantastic. I totally agree. But the aesthetic argument and the visuals are the same. They've not
Yeah.
changed at all. But and that's what we have to place the emphasis on, not on the techniques and the technology, but on the visual itself, on the meaning of the and the creation that you're making.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Okay, Sid, this is a complicated question in a way, because I'm going to ask you to briefly describe or show, if you happen to have them handy. Maybe we could drop these in as JPEGs. I don't know how we're going to do this, but you know it's a tricky question, but describe the strongest free images that you've made in your career, and why do you think they're important? Did the client like them? Did you get paid? Did they strengthen your career? Did they have an impact on your career? These three iconic photos in your career that you think, yeah.
I think this, yeah. I mean, if you to ask me this tomorrow, I'd probably tell you three different ones.
Of course.
To be honest.
Of course.
This one, which is, I think, behind me, or you can't really see it now because I'm plugged in. I can unplug. That's it. This one of Bagger. Can you see that?
Yeah, I know that image.
Yeah. That was it was a job, actually. I was doing the record sleeve for Matumbi for the album for CBS for the record called Point of View, and that was before we actually did the shoot of the album, and it was I think I've got the album just here. Yeah, there it is. Because I was using it for something. This is the actual image what was used for the album sleeve.
Yeah, right.
And that was the main side.
Okay.
We were setting up for that image, so it was a commercial job, but that was never used by anyone. And sadly, Bagger, Bevin Fagan, his real name, died a few years ago and was penniless and was a busker. But he was a great, had a beautiful voice, fantastic. And I loved the way he just instinctively picked up that bottle and looked at me and spread his legs and gave me that incredible look. And the young lad, who I think was Dennis Bovell's son,
oh wow,
just walked into the photograph. And I went, yes, I knew I'd got it. It wasn't right for the record sleeve because it was about the whole band, but obviously. But it was, so I wasn't paid for it, but I was paid for the session, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
I was.
You kind of stole an extra.
Yeah, I stole an extra. But the interesting thing about that whole place, I've used that is shot in Cambridge, near Cambridge Heath Station in near Bethnal Green. Just off Hackney Road there. And it was a series of bridges which into two railway lines overlap. And the light in there is just beautiful. Yeah. I used to call it my studio. And I shot
noticed you shot a lot of
photographs in that area because it was such a beautiful location. And I could control the light by moving people to the right or the left.
Yeah, right.
And it was just... So that was always a really important picture for me because it was one of the most successful in that location.
But you didn't necessarily get paid, or?
I did get paid, yeah.
You did, okay.
Yeah, okay, no, that was commissioned by. In fact, it's an interesting little story, really, the commission of doing that album sleeve Point of View, because the band wanted to have me to go down to the recording studio in Surrey, which I did go to, and EMI sent me down there, and it was just not right. They were mucking around. They wouldn't be serious. They wouldn't, and they were lovely guys. I don't misunderstand me. I got on really well with them all, but I wasn't getting the photograph. I knew it. I went back to EMI and I said, look, this is what we've shot. And I shot in color, and I said, I'm not happy with it at all. It's just not what I want to publish on. I said, can we, and they agreed completely. They said, no, this isn't right for the record sleeve. He said, okay, I'm going to pull rank with them and say, we've got to be serious. Where do you want? And he said to me, where do you want? I think his name was I can't remember his name, the guy at EMI. He said, where do you want to do it? And I told him where I wanted to do it. And he pulled rank and said, you've got to go and do this shoot seriously and do it in Hackney where Sid wants to do it. And they loved it. And Dennis Bovell has said several times in recent years that the picture of the band is his favourite picture of Matumbi. So
Dennis Bovell, what a legend.
Yeah.
And a great activist in the anti-racist movement as well. I know I work with him at Hackney Theatre and stuff. It's like, he's just amazing.
He is. And Matumbi were a great band. They did one of the first Rock Against Racism gigs at the Royal College of Art. They were a brilliant band. You remember that program on TV called Empire Road?
Yep.
That was one of their songs, Empire Road. They did the theme song for it. It's on Point of View, actually. And that's Bagger singing on the.
Yeah, because weren't they on the same label as Linton Kwesi Johnson recently?
Yeah, they were. They were friends of Linton Kwesi Johnson. They still are, actually.
So, image number 2.
Number 2 is again from that same period, and it's the one why I say it's important to me is the Guardian do this thing which I'm sure you see, my best shot. On a Thursday, and they get a photographer every Thursday. They've been doing it for quite a few years, and they ask them what is their best shot, and they asked me to do one a couple of years ago, and that's a really tough question when you get asked that question when you've done a lot of you've been taking photographs for 50 odd years. It's difficult, but I chose this one which I can show you. I don't know if you've got a copy of this book.
Not yet, and I didn't see the exhibition.
You can't get it, but it is being reprinted in spring next year, a slightly different version, but in America, but it'll be available in England. And if I can find it. Sorry, wasting your recording time.
It's cool, relax, it's cool. I'll have a cup of tea.
There we are.
All right. Yeah, wow.
Why I like that photograph is, and why I chose it for that, for my best shot is because the story I liked behind it. It was part of the Rock Against Racism Militant Entertainment Tour in 1979. And we'd organized, it was the third gig on the tour where we went around the country with 3 bands, which changed every 3 nights. And the 3 bands on that particular night were the Gang of 4, Ruts, and Misty and Roots. And we all drove up in these old vans. I drove, I think it was Red Saunders' old combi van, and up to Cromer in North Norfolk.
Wow.
The West Rumsden Pavilion.
I've done a shot there. It's a long way.
Yeah, it was a long drive, I remember. And we got up there and there was nobody there at all. All the bands did their sound checks, the Ruts did theirs and the Misty did theirs and the Gang of 4. And there was no punters at all. And we thought, oh God, this is going to be the party where nobody turns up and it's going to be a disaster. But then shortly before the doors were supposed to open, all these double-decker buses came from all over Norfolk, from Norwich and other towns, with all the punters. They were all there on these and the guys who came, they didn't even come into the gig. They sat and smoked for 3 hours out on the beach. And I saw that girl get on the stage. It was in the Ruts set, and it was one of those, as I said in the Guardian interview, it was one of those adrenaline-filled moments where you just went, that is incredible, the way she's reclining on the monitors on the stage. I've got to get that shot. And I climbed over people's heads with 2 Nikons and a bag of lenses, and I think I had a Norman flash on the side, or a Metz. I can't remember which it was, but so it's a bit like a big old press Graflex I was hanging on to. And I got on the stage and I saw the shot and I went bang like that. And really there was so little time in it. I didn't know whether the flash had gone, whether I'd set it right, whether the exposure was right. whether the shutter speed was high enough so it wasn't blurry. I just hoped, it was like fingers crossed on that, because the second later, the bouncers had picked me up and literally threw me with the cameras and everything over the top of everybody's head. And I landed on one of the cameras, which the pentaprism on that Nikon has still got a dint in it from that night.
Well.
And it was, and I remember the drive back and after the gig, and I got back to London about 7 a.m. Drove most of the night, and because the people I were with, none of them drove. It was so I had to. They were all snoring all the way back to London, and I was driving this old VW, and I went straight to the darkroom and processed the film.
Yeah,
and
wow.
I remember that fantastic anticipation when you're washing it, and you haven't washed it long enough, but you have to have a sneak to have a look. And I sneaked a bit of the film up, and I went, yes. Went off and had a cigarette and knew I got the picture. So it was one of those pictures which was not a happy accident, but it could so easily have not happened. It was just
like a missed moment. That's the worst.
Yeah, and I'm not really a Cartier-Bresson's decisive moment type person, but sometimes there are those moments when you know you can only get it. You've only got seconds or to get it, and you might not, and I've missed quite a lot too, like that as well. I mean, there's plenty which didn't make it. And the third one, I don't know. I was trying to think of something more. I suppose going back again, it's old. It would be that group of urban Aboriginal lads in the street in Redfern looking at me. I think that's in the book too. No, it won't be in this book. It's in one of the Cafe Royal books.
I've got that Cafe Royal.
It'd be the one with street portraits, and it's I think the last, not the last double page spread, I think, and it's I love that picture because it was really the first job I ever did, and I really was quite a naive photographer. Yeah, this one.
Yes.
And it just, there was, for me, a real link between young black lads I knew in London and a million miles away in terms of experience. These 3 young black lads in Redfern in Sydney, who were not African or Afro-Caribbean, but were Aboriginal, and they were great. I remember them joking and happy to be photographed. There was no problems with it, and the fact that it was my first published piece was made it doubly important to me, and to see it as a big A3 spread in a magazine was quite excited.
Yeah,
in fact,
A3.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It was, well, sadly, I don't have a copy of that, but I do have the 2016 print that I made at that time, and the vintage print, which I would never sell, but I would sell it for a lot of money if I did, because it's irreplaceable. But that's, I think they're the 3 which, I mean, the other one obviously is the Paul Simonon one, because it's been so commercially successful for me. It's paid a few bills off.
That's probably years. What, I don't know if you've got celebrity status, which I believe you have in my view, but that probably is the photo that gave you celebrity status.
Yeah, it has been published more than anything I've ever done, and it's that film White Riot. They used 100 and something, but on the cover of there it is.
Yeah. Do you just want to, you could briefly tell us about the Steve McQueen thing?
He's doing a series of, I think, 3 films it is now, called Uprising, and it's really based on the it starts with the history of black people mostly it seems in London, and there's various interviews with people. I really don't know very much about it, but it's one of the first major signposts is the New Cross fire.
Yeah, right. And that story needs to be mainstream.
Yeah, and it's, so the whole story is about, and then it's the Black People's Day of Action, which was in 1981. they're two of the main signposts that I know about. But it's really, I don't know. I only know that they want photographs from Lewisham, which they've, and they also want photographs of me with Dennis Bovell for some reason. And they've done an interview with me about that, about Lewisham. It's quite bizarre, actually.
That's that, you know, that Lewisham sequence. I don't know this to be true, but are you the only photographer that documented that? Because I rarely.
No, not at all. Not at all. There's a lot of Homer Sykes did a great set of pictures there. Don McCullum was there, actually.
Yeah, wow.
And he did a photograph of Darkest How at almost the same moment as mine. If you look in that book of his called, it's not the one I've got here. It's Carol, my wife's got it over. It's hers. I can't remember what it's called. In England, it's called. There's a picture of Darkest How at almost the same moment as mine. So he was there. There was a lot of photographers there who did some really good work too. Chris Steele Perkins was there.
Oh, wow.
What's his name who died? I can't remember his name. Stuart Franklin, he was there.
It's just whenever I see that discussed, which is not often, of course, but your photos are featured.
Yeah.
One of my best friends was there, and yeah, that changed his life.
It changed. It was an incredible day. I'll never forget that day. It was a day like no other that I've ever been on. I mean, it started. I remember being absolutely exhausted. I shot a lot of film. Well, I shot all the film I had, which I don't know how many rolls it was, but I've still got most of the negatives. Some of the negatives are lost, but most of them I've got. 99% of them I've got still. It was an extraordinary day because, as Darkest How said in his speech, which he said at the memorial for David Widgery, that David Widgery passed him the microphone and said, "Darkest, get up there and say something." And he said that this was not a march. This was a intimidation to the people of South London, and it had to be stopped by all means necessary. And people, it was a battle. It was a real battle. It was I'm surprised that nobody got killed or seriously injured, because people were throwing scaffold poles. They were setting things on fire. Flares.
My friend who was there, he was like, I think he was about 16 or 17. But they were just so frustrated and upset about being chased around by Nazis. That was their everyday experience in Lewisham. It was just like a total nightmare to be around the area. And this was the day they thought, hey, we're going to give it back to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. We stopped running, they stopped chasing. It's an iconic moment, I think. So
it was, but it was also because in some ways there's a lot of parallels with today, because the Metropolitan Police were completely out of control, and the Metropolitan Police were the most racist police force in the country, without a doubt. And I photographed this family, which was also in the Rock Against Racism book, which, as I say, will be out next spring. It's being published by a company called Rare Bird Books in Los Angeles, but it will be available worldwide. They're publishing it in Europe, in Far East, and in America all at the same time.
That's so cool. Does the publisher believe there's a market for that in America then?
Yeah,
they obviously
definitely.
Do. Yeah, wow.
Wow. And so I've changed it from the first book. There's no graphics in there. It's all photographs, but it's looking really nice, I must say.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to it too, because you can't buy them. They're like £1,000 on Amazon.
Yeah, I know. Kill me.
It's just ridiculous. I've got 4 here. That's all that's left. It sold out so quickly. It just was. When we had the exhibition at Autograph, when it was launched, Mark Seeley was the director of Autograph, and one of the co-editors with Carol Tulloch. He said, "Sid, will you sign 30 books? Because we normally sell 20 to 30 books. We sold 150 on the opening night of the exhibition. It's been very successful. So, but in there's a photograph which I took of this family called the Fosters, and they were and nobody else has photographed any of the people, which was the lead up to Lewisham. And they were one of the families which were raided in dawn raids by the Metropolitan Police. They raided 30 houses and they arrested 21 young people and sling them in jail. The youngest was 14, and she was a girl. But it was partly because the Daily Mail, of course, the Daily Express, the Evening Standard, had caricatured every young black Afro-Caribbean lad as being a mugger or a potential mugger. So they were never charged with anything, but they were all arrested.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to their house and photographed his mum and dad, and Christopher Foster, who was 16 at the time, who was one of the ones arrested. And his dad, David Foster, became the leader of the Lewisham 21 defence campaign, which was what led the National Front to call the anti-mugging march, which was what they called it, the March on Lewisham on the in August 77. So, and this was in May 77 that the arrests took place. But that was the start of the whole build-up to the demonstration. And I have photographs of that family who were incredibly kind and welcoming when I went to photograph them. But according to Paul Foote, who sadly is no longer with us, great journalist, he said that I've no proof of this, but he said that the operation of the arrest was called Operation Nigger Hunt, which, if you want to know how racist the Metropolitan Police were, just think on that. That's the beginning of that. And that day was the police. There was a quarter of the Metropolitan Police were on duty that day, and their entire mounted division. They came for a fight.
Yeah.
And they brought riot shields for the first time to mainland Britain. They militarized the police that day.
And I guess, I'm not an historian, but it feels like, was that just before the SPG came into existence?
Yes, it was just
which
before.
Which kind of ramped it up.
Yeah, they ramped it up when they then moved on to Southall and killed Blair Peach and smashed Clarence Baker's skull. And no, that's true. And it was also an important point, though, in terms of anti-racism, because that was after that the Anti-Nazi League was formed. And as a result, really, of Lewisham and the events of Lewisham. And so it was an important turning point.
Yeah, I mean, that, the Rock Against Racism show at Victoria Park, it's like that changed lives, but it's like those kind of moments, it's like, hey, we're fed up with being pushed around, it's time to go back. It's like the movement came together.
Absolutely.
An amazing time historically, I believe.
Yeah, it was. And honestly, at the time, I didn't even realize it. And I didn't even realize the significance of those photographs. And they those negatives have laid in a filing cabinet for years and years. And it was really Carol Tulloch, who's my wife, who insisted on me dragging them out and saying, look, I want to see more of these. Let me see this one. Let me see that. And she's been instrumental in
give Carol a hug for me, because she did well there, opening your filing cabinet. I thank her for that.
Well, Mark Seeley wrote in the introduction to the Rock Against Racism book, is that he said that history of photography is full of archives lying in distress in filing cabinets, waiting for cultural agents to come and enunciate their worth. And I think that's quite right. Yeah.
Okay, so today, if you had a few sentences to give to a student who was entering the photography workplace, what would be your key advice? What would you say to them?
I think above all else, and I really do, I'm talking to myself in a way, is believe in yourself, because I didn't believe in myself enough. And I was often put off and didn't do things what I would have done because I thought, oh no, I'm not good enough. And as you talked about before, that imposter syndrome, I really have spent a lot of my life listening to people and thinking, oh no, they're really, especially some of the commercial photographers I know and have known. No, I'm not putting them down, but they were really like on a different league in terms of, wealth and big studios and fantastic equipment, and really you have to believe in what you're doing, and that would be my advice. I mean, I also think you've got to avoid. I really do. I've always held this as a mantra for me. Is that one of the things I did in the 1980s was a series of books which I did with my longtime pal Red Saunders, which were a day in the life of books, and we brought photographers from all over the world. And like, for example, the most successful one, because it was won awards, was A Day in the Life of London. We brought 100 photographers in 1984 from all over the world, people like Andre Cortez, Don McCullen, William Klein, David Hearn, Sally Soames, Jane Bown. I mean, the list was extraordinary. It was an A to Z of photography, and we really approached it. I mean, I even spoke to Henri Cartier-Bresson, and he couldn't make it, but see if he'd come. But he wished it well, but he couldn't make it. But to get Cortez was, I mean, Philip Lorca de Corsia was our contact in New York, who brought Cortez over. And we brought these photographers together to London for a single day, and we sent them to all sorts of different places, including myself and Red were both also two of the photographers, and there was 100 of us. I went to the East End. I went with David Widgery around his patients with him as a doctor. In fact, I'm doing a thing for F8, a takeover with the pictures from A Doctor's Story later this year. So it'll be online.
Classic.
And it was, and we put it together as a 288-page book. Which,
mate, I've never heard of this book. Why is that?
You can still buy them on. Here's like for a fantastic spread of in Pentonville Jail of Mike Abrahams' pictures. Very good photographer, Mike Abrahams. That's one of mine.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was. We ended up with 500,000 images, and everybody had to hand. We co-opted people like Keith Johnson Photography, who's now Calumet, who are now Wex Photographic. They are now. They've been taken over so many times. And they had a 24-hour, for the whole 24 hours, they opened in Ramila Street where they were for hiring film. They'd lend out film cameras and lenses, and it was like a pit stop. You could go and get coffee there.
What a great project.
Everybody worked for 24 hours wherever they were sent. For example, we sent O. Winston Link. You know, O. Winston Link, who did those amazing pictures of trains in America with people. There's a famous one, two people sat in a convertible watching in a drive-in movie with a huge steam train going past. Check him out. He's long dead now, but anyway, we mixed people up. We sent Richard Young, the famous paparazzi photographer, to photograph homeless people in Waterloo. So we sent Pete Lavery, an advertising photographer and a long-time old friend of mine, down the sewers with his 10-8 plate camera. It was wonderful to work with other photographers, and we did another one in Los Angeles, and we did another one in Ireland called Ireland: A Week in the Life of a Nation. And the one in Los Angeles was, I think London was my favorite. Maybe, or I like LA as well, but and that was 85, the LA one. But working together with Red and working with other photographers was a fantastic highlight in my career, I must say.
Yeah.
And to get to meet so many of my heroes, people like William Klein in particular. But there was to give you an idea of how crazy it all was, there was a lovely story which I told someone recently. Was when we were in Los Angeles, we rented this office on the corner of Hollywood and Vine, opposite the Capitol Records building.
I know it.
Yeah. It's a famous building, of course.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, you would know it as a DJ. You'd have to know it. But I went in the office one day. We were really busy, and it was crazy. And this guy I walked past him and he was sat in the chair and he said, "Oh, hi, I'm Robert." And I went, yeah, great. And I walked past him and I got halfway across the room and I went, "Oh, fucking hell, that was Robert Mapplethorpe." And I had to go back and say, "Oh,
Oops.
Robert, hi, welcome."
Oops.
Yeah, oops.
That's an amazing story. I never heard of that project. It's crazy.
Well, if you look on Amazon, you can buy a Day in the Life of London's quite cheaply, actually.
Yeah, I'm
Because
going to
we
get one.
printed 100,000 copies. It was a huge,
But I'd
huge.
never imagined that Red was involved with. Hey, I need to check that. That's brilliant. It's
Yeah, no, Red and I were the editors, and I think there's you won't recognize either of us, or you might do.
Yeah.
Me, that's me, and there's Red.
Extraordinary. Hey, Red looked quite tidy there.
Yeah.
If okay, so that kind of concludes the formalities, if you like. But what I want to ask you is there anything you want to say that you feel that you haven't covered? You got the mic.
Yeah. No, I don't know. I think one of the things what I would say is that you also have to enjoy it, because photography is an enjoyable thing to do.
Oh.
And I've always enjoyed my life in photography, and I continue to. I'm obsessed with images, but you have to remember, especially for students, that the image is primary. It's all about the image. It's not about anything else. It's not about the techniques or the cameras or the gear that you've got. It's about the image. And you think of the history of the world, and you know we learned so much from images. Think of that child Napalm in Vietnam walking towards the camera. You think of Nelson Mandela coming out of the jail with Winnie Mandela, and a history of Soweto. I've forgotten his name. The guy carrying the dying child, or the Bloody Sunday with the priest with the white handkerchief waving. Our history and understanding of the world is so conditioned by imagery, and so we have to remember it's in awesome power in terms of formation, and I think that's exciting as well as scary.
Okay, well that concludes our interview. So I just want to say thank you. It's been an honor to talk to you.
Oh, no, you're welcome.
No, I seriously think that you'll contribute. I've raised your name many times on my course.
Brilliant, thank you.
You inspire me. So I just want to say thanks for giving us this time and the breadth of your experience and your stories. Fantastic.